Welcome. Hi. Hi. Come on in.
Make a suggestion.
Yes, sir.
On your website, can you put like a campus map as to where everything
Or
is?
say it, because all of us parents,
Okay.
even though we had a kid that would hear, this is new.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
Like-
Street learning. We're like.
Definitely didn't know what that was.
Okay. Yep.
You know, when you're in here every day.
That I can like search your website.
And
and
you
say,
may have.
I didn't see it.
Yep. Okay.
Just a suggestion.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, find YouTube. Just make sure that sound is working. Just go to our channel. We're having a hard time finding it too. I'm trying to help people. I thought Sarah or somebody. Just like YouTube and see if we can, see if I can help.
that you see here, policies, parents, families, administrators, non-youth support, education, all of this can come together to support and make healthier communities and healthier outcomes for kids. We think about like the climate, and all here have like this climate of academic excellence. It's very apparent to me in like all the variety of opportunities you all provide, opportunities for curricular growth.
Let us know if the sound is working.
Right? Our goal, and something y'all are in the process of doing, is establishing a similar climate for prevention that allows delaying alcohol and other drug use until, thank you, a student's brain is more developed, right? So that is our goal. And when we think about the definition of prevention, the one that we use, it's a lifelong process. It's about empowering folks with information, with tools, with skills. And there's three main components. So that is identifying and addressing risk factors, things that put children at a higher likelihood of entering a relationship with alcohol and other drugs. I'll get into more what those are later. Also, magnifying protective factors. There are so many of them, very, very evident in your community, just from my 2 visits here, that students have that keep them healthy. And we want to build on those. That's our goal. And helping identify behaviors that could lead to disease. That's not always just this child is using alcohol. This child is vaping nicotine. It can be like this child has negative self-talk, right? That's influencing their self-esteem. And that could put them at a risk later of trying to change that with alcohol and other drugs. So those are some things we are thinking about. And it's never too early to start prevention. Prevention in earlier years looks like building that self-esteem. What does healthy decision-making look like? What do healthy friendships look like? And from there, we can start to talk more about addiction and alcohol and other drugs as well. So you're probably eager to hear what's going on here at Louisville Collegiate. I've had many conversations, and to be honest with you, these themes are generalizing, but I will say these are some threads that have run through different conversations with multiple grade levels of children here. So the first one is that they perceive alcohol to be less risky than other drugs, and they feel like it's fairly normal to use alcohol, even as a teenager, even as a young person. When I ask students if they think using alcohol and other drugs is inevitable as a teenager, about half of them said yes, and half of them said no, right? So this made for a very interesting conversation. What's going on with your life experience that makes you feel that way? And what's going on with yours that gives you other options? And how can we share and talk about that in a classroom setting? So there's lots of factors that go into this. We'll talk more about that as well. The children that I've met with here are future oriented. They have things to do, people to see, places to go. They have that all in their mind already, which is really protective. That's extremely healthy for them to have an idea, okay, this is who I want to be, this is what I'm moving towards, and they're achievement motivated. Now, achievement motivation can be really protective because that's positive, healthy stress moving towards a goal, and things that interfere with that goal, they're less likely to engage in alcohol and other drugs. However, stress that can be associated with achievement motivation can be a risk factor if it's in the absence of like a healthy coping mechanism, right? So that's another part of my discussion this week. How do we have those healthy coping mechanisms? Now, they believe most of their peers are using alcohol. Alcohol more so than nicotine or marijuana or another drug. This is not uncommon. This is something I hear from the majority of communities I go to, from Switzerland to here, to Texas, to California. It is not uncommon for children to say, yeah, like most people are doing this. I know that. I see it. I hear stories. I've heard people get in trouble. My older siblings told me about that. And I watch my parents do it. So it's a thing that happens here.
we use an evidence-based prevention approach. It's called the social norms approach. I'll get into a little bit later, but that's part of how we start addressing this belief. And lastly, students think that addiction can be avoided with self-control and smart decision-making, right? So this idea of addiction as a disease is something we've been talking about. And to further address that, we have been discussing what are risk factors for addiction, right? Family history is just one piece of it, but I don't know if any of your children have asked you if they have a family history of addiction. If they did, it was because I asked them to do that. We talk about that as if this runs in your family puts you at a slightly higher likelihood. Do we all have the mechanisms in our brain to acquire an addiction? Absolutely. But it's something to be aware of. The biggest common denominator in research we see in terms of folks who develop an addiction is how old they are when they start. They're usually young, right? They're usually teenagers and adolescents. That has to do with brain development, which I'm going to get into more. Other risks are a phenomenon of craving and a building of tolerance. When those two things start to happen, someone is in a progression process towards their brains prioritizing that drug over other things. And lastly, and this is very expansive, but as a student's surroundings, someone's surroundings can put them at a higher risk or be very protective. You all are a vital key part of your children's surroundings. Family norms, that's one of the first things they say. Oh, like what my family thinks. Yes, exactly. I know it might not always seem like it, but when I'm telling my story with students, they're like, oh, what'd your parents think about that? You know, like they really are interested because they're thinking, oh, what would my parents think about that? So surroundings can also be media, friend groups, culture, school culture, community culture, a number of things that we explore in the classroom and how this starts to shape and affect our perceptions. I try to tell students as well, I was someone in school who I had quote unquote good grades. I could go to the school I wanted to go to. I had a job. I had things I was working towards, and from the outside, it could have looked like I was highly functional. I wasn't maybe showing some of these health effects that kids think of. Oh, well, you know, your liver starts to shut down. And when students said today, you get bad breath all the time. It's like, yeah, that can happen. The things that they're told, you're getting a cough, you're doing these things, but they might not think about consequences of substance use as like losing a friend, right? Or feeling more anxious when you're not using a substance, or maybe feeling like things don't matter as much, right? So I try to key into these smaller changes to get them to think about the effects of substance use, not just for addiction, but on any level. So how the teen brain works. You all probably get to witness this live action more than I do, but the teen brain is going through a number of structural changes. And one of those is a decrease in gray matter. That's the actual information, the piece of the brain that's processing information, an increase in white matter. So these are the communication channels of the brain. Essentially, like the brain's getting rid of things it learned in childhood that it no longer uses or no longer needs. And the things that it is practicing habitually are becoming more effective, more efficient in their processes. And students at this age can produce higher levels of dopamine than we can as adults. I'm like, you can have more fun, congratulations. But this dopamine, right, which rewards them on a daily basis for things that are healthy for them. They produce dopamine naturally in really healthy ways, but it can lend them to being risk-taking. They are primed to take risks at this age. So to some degree, their curiosity towards substances makes sense, right? The key there is starting to talk about healthy risk taking, like making a new friend or trying out for a team or celebrating in a new way or something like that, rather than deciding that we're going to take a risk that can change the way the brain develops. This right here, I'm not going to play it, but last year, Julianne Dietz, who's a high school counselor, talked to me about a local resource here called Operation Parent. Some of you might be familiar with their resources. They have so many webinars and great information. This is just one of them, and it's a deep dive on the teen's brain and how it leads to riskier behavior. But ultimately, when I'm talking to students about their brain, I want them to understand which parts are still developing, until what time, and how vital it is for them to protect it. Because when we introduce alcohol or other drugs to a developing brain, it starts to change the way this development is happening. And the prefrontal cortex doesn't turn out the same way. I tell kids, like, I have the chronic disease of addiction. I'll always have addiction. I'll always be in recovery because I changed the way my brain was wired initially. I can't fully undo that. Like, I can learn new coping mechanisms and I can learn new life skills and take care of myself. However, I always need to look out for my impulse control, my emotional regulation. It's the reason that relapse happens is folks, their brains have been rewired. And something that I talk about in several communities I go to, I hear and I understand, like, this idea, if I give my kid alcohol as a teenager and they do it under my supervision and I tell them the proper way to do it, isn't that going to make for healthier outcomes, right? So that they're not going off on their own and doing these things. I understand why we would want that to work. Unfortunately, what research tells us, right, is the teenage brain cannot be taught to use alcohol and other drugs, quote unquote, in a healthy way or in a correct way. The teenage brain, with all of its dopamine, takes that information and translates it into riskier use, right? If a child's using one way around you, we have a couple of drinks together, they go to their peers and that permission translates to drinking in higher risk ways. And when we're thinking about delayed use, right, which is what we advocate for, it's not the say no to drugs, but it's like the longer you can delay your use, the less likely you are to experience negative health outcomes, including addiction. This is some of the research we point to. There are a number of studies that echo these findings. I'll just read it because I put the whole quote. Findings from the current study do not support the notion that parental permissibility of alcohol use, even in small supervised amounts, is likely to reduce later misuse. The current study found that parent permissibility was associated with higher drinking rates and experienced consequences for college teens that a strict policy of no underage use would not. So these consequences can vary from the smaller ones that I discussed with you. I say smaller, you can't compare them. A change in someone's mental health can be just as severe as being arrested, right? But they range from those smaller to those larger consequences. I too wanted to include, of course, this social norms approach to prevention. And these things go hand in hand, right? Because when children tell me, yeah, most teenagers are using alcohol and other drugs, it's very normal, it's very natural for them to want to fit into what their peers are doing. They're constantly observing their peers, and we're constantly observing our peers to find ways to fit into these social norms. What happens is we tend to have false perceptions. Our perspectives are skewed by life experiences, stories we hear, shows that we watch. The reason that teen shows include a lot of alcohol and other drug use or sex or things that might be considered unhealthy or scandalous in some way is because it draws attention. It draws viewers, which for that industry makes them money. We tend to pay more attention to that information actually as a survival mechanism. When we see something risky, our brain takes it and magnifies it as an attempt to keep us away from it. But it can start to make us feel like this is happening all around me. Everyone's doing it. I'm the only one who's not. And that can lead to riskier behavior, to alcohol and other drug use. So this approach to prevention, which we introduce data, region-specific data, if we have it, to talk about this approach, and we start to talk about your perspective and how it is shaped over time through our surroundings, right? Through what we're hearing. Our hope is not to, I don't want to, I mean, it'd be great if I could, but I can't just convince kids that like, yeah, most teenagers, according to our data, are not using alcohol and other drugs. But I want them to start thinking through, right? Is what I feel, is what I think I see, does it apply to everyone around me, right? Because I want them to feel more comfortable making the choice to delay their substance use or to use an alternative coping skill. That's another thing when I think about parents who are like, I want to teach my kids how to use properly. I think sometimes what kids need more is being taught like how to cope, right? Or how to socialize in a way that doesn't involve alcohol and other drugs. Because for me, I did it that way. I socialized that way. And then without the drug, I couldn't do it on my own. I didn't have those skills. And those are things that carry us through our lives. So this social norms approach, I just wanted to show a little bit of data related. This came out in 2021 from the Kentucky Incentives for Prevention Survey. This was conducted in I think it's 127 school districts here in Kentucky, and it was about 93,000 students who took the survey in grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. You can see the percentages of past year vaping. We'll just look at 8th grade, for example. 13.3% of students reported vaping, but 8th graders thought 36.8% of their peers were vaping. That's a big gap. Our goal with the social norms approach is to close that gap, have their perception closer to reality so that they can understand that health is the norm and they can feel comfortable in that choice. You might be thinking, and students often tell me, that's not true. People are lying. They don't want to get in trouble. There are definitely measures built into surveys to pull out inconsistent data. But even if it wasn't true, I asked students, could it be not true to the point where it's 60, 70, 80% like you're telling me? And they're like, oh, that's kind of a stretch, isn't it? So something I wanted to take a look at. And I think too, with social norms, something that's important for us to remember as adults, especially in like a helping role. Before I joined this organization, when I came here and I saw the data and I saw the social norms approach, I was like, no way. Because I'd been working with people struggling with addiction who were having problems related to alcohol and other drug use. And I was honestly, I was surprised. So we ourselves, if we're someone who encounters this often, have to check our own beliefs. If we think the majority of us are using, or they're okay with their children using, that's going to start to shape our perception of what we think we should do. And I guarantee you, the sheer numbers here tell me that there's a lot of like-minded people in the room who share the same beliefs and values in terms of delaying use. So speaking of alcohol use again, these are the numbers for past year alcohol use from that same survey. There's lots of bars. The brown is 2012. Blue is most recent numbers. You can see how past year use has been going down in most areas, not all. But 12th grade use past year was at 31.4%. This is important information too. In this community, I hear like, yeah, we're not doing it now, but when people get closer to college, they're really doing it. It leads to this anticipatory socialization. This is how I'm supposed to be when I'm an 11th grader. And this data tells them that there are other opportunities, other options there. So I wanted to speak a little bit about your specific culture here, which again, you know better than I do. I'm well aware of that. I do get to talk to families in places where drinking is even legal at 16 or legal at 18, who are probably dealing with some of the same like normalization or commercialization of alcohol that is here in Louisville, Kentucky. I know on my way driving from Atlanta, I saw lots of bourbon tour and distillery billboards and a big sign that said, "We have the best Delta 8, which is a chemical compound in the marijuana plant. We can get into that later, but I see it, and I understand maybe some of the concern of the differences parenting here than in other places. When I'm thinking about this, I like to ask the question, we don't have to answer now, but like, what does culture mean to you? Because oftentimes your culture is not the bourbon itself. Maybe it is the bourbon accompanying an activity, a festival, an event. My mind goes to the Kentucky Derby, obviously. There are lots of aspects to that aren't, alcohol is not the main focal point, right? So I think kind of trying to separate those in our mind and thinking about what are the pieces of culture that I can share with my children, right? And emphasize these other pieces of. I'm not saying people using in these situations is not a conversation to have. It absolutely is. But, why do people wear the big hats and what's going on with these horses? I'm thinking of simple pieces, but culture can be a lot more. It's attitudes, it's beliefs, it's history. I don't think your whole history here is bourbon. I think there's a lot more to it. Risk factors, these are very clearly pulled from data from the youth.gov sites. It's a conglomerate of research, but I would talk about parenting in this climate the same way I would talk about parenting in most. I can share with you the risk factors that we know of for substance misuse, like lack of adult supervision, substance use among parents, associating with peers who also use, accessibility and availability, norms and advertisements. And I can share with you the protections. These are things that we can boost. Clear expectations for behavior communicated often and time again. Healthy and realistic normative beliefs, something takes time to work on, honestly, but anytime your kids, not everyone, or there's always, stop them right there. Is it always? Is it everyone? It's a really quick thing to get them a perspective check that can start to stick with them. A family that provides structure, limits, and support. Coping and problem solving skills, supporting the development of those. These are ways we can prevent use even in cultures where use might be more normal or more common. So a potential conversation, I wanted to invite a conversation starter. And if anyone else wants to share one, if you're like thinking of one as we're talking about it, right? This could be a perfect way to have a brief prevention conversation with a child. Maybe not perfect, but we saw some folks intoxicated at XYZ this weekend. Did you notice that? Why do you think people drink at these events? Do you think they could enjoy themselves without drinking? Why or why not? Are there any risks to that? This is open-ended, right? It's not you having to tell them all the research, all the health-based information, but rather gather information from them. What are they hearing? What are their perceptions? And after we listen to that and take that in, we can identify places, oh, well, I'm not sure about that, or maybe they need some more education around this, or maybe this is something we can continue to address and talk about. This can be a very healthy way to introduce that. Just to make sure I'm not going over on time. Let's see here. Before I get into some other kind of tangible skills like conversation and things like that, this is a general overview of things that research tells us that are effective that families can do. So having these frequent health-based conversations, brief ones, we say 61-minute conversations, not 1 60-minute. It sticks better that way. It becomes more natural. They are more inclined to ask you questions when they pop up for them in that way. If they know this is something we can just talk about in an easy way. Modeling healthy attitudes and behavior. So this does not mean I don't drink in front of my children. That's not what that means, but it means having a conversation around that behavior. Hey, you might notice I'm having some wine with dinner. This is something I do. I'm an adult and my brain's fully developed. Because I care about your health and your well-being, I just want to remind you, this is what I expect from you. Saying that, now, I think if a child sees, right, all the time, this is happening all the time, we have alcohol at every celebration, this is present, that does start to set a norm. So if there are opportunities to celebrate without alcohol or other drugs, that would also be helpful in this way. But that's a way to model attitudes and behaviors. And another way, like when we're setting limits with children, like, I know everyone's going to be at this party drinking, and I don't want you to do that. Very simply, some people will be drinking. I want you to be the person who does not. I want you to be a part of the group who says no, right? Let them know that it's not everyone. Expressing those limits, expectations, and the consequences you have in place for that. Often, my parents and I maybe talked about alcohol and other drugs one time, and it was like, oh, Kelly, that is bad. You know that, right? And I'm like, yes, I know. But over time, as I got older, I started to interpret their silence, because that's how my brain wanted to see it, as their compliance. It's like, oh, they're just not saying anything, but they probably know, don't they? Absolutely not. They didn't think that it was on my radar. That's why they weren't talking about it. But that is the power of these open communication. It's often an open communication. And having some idea, right, of what's going on at friends' houses, at school, in the classroom, on weekends. When stress is high, how does your child manage their stress? What does that look like on them? Is it they're more silent? Is it they're more angry? So that we can be preventative in that way. Now, this is two slides. I found some really, really great information from a public school parents association in Brookline, Massachusetts, that had come out with some information about hosting substance-free events, because children still absolutely want to celebrate and have fun. And I know you want them to do the same. And there are ways to offer what we call non-use support. And one of those is giving alternatives, right? If there's a party happening on the weekend, what if there's another party where substances are not allowed, right? This is something, these are just a few tips I will run through. Plan this in conjunction with your child. They're better at themes than I am. They can come up with a party real quick. Plan it with your child. Be there. You don't have to be hovering in the space, but be at the location where it is happening. Host 10 to 15 teens per adult. Power in numbers. Ask for help. Ask for other people to come hang out and eat cheese with you or charcuterie or whatever. Set a guest list, right? And state substance-free expectations clearly on any communications about this event, right? If it's an evite, a text, let that be a part of it. And the guest list is to make sure folks don't come who you don't know, who maybe aren't clear on what is expected here. Setting start and end times to provide structure. Teen brains really want structure, though they fight it at every I shouldn't say that. Some of them fight at every opportunity. Setting clear ground rules and expectations, things to consider, right? Where are the bags stored? Do they have access to their bags throughout the events? I can understand where this feels, it may feel like oppressive in some sense, but this is absolutely an okay way to set boundaries, to make this a place where kids can be safe and they can be themselves and they don't have to worry about alcohol and other drugs. Use specific entrances and exits. Certain rooms in the house are off limits. Having plenty of food and beverages. Don't allow folks to bring their own. There's edible forms of marijuana, absolutely, and they're bringing their own drink. Secure alcohol and medications. I have this question frequently, should I lock up my alcohol? There's not research to say absolutely yes, but if you are feeling that, absolutely go with your gut, right? If you feel like, we know access can be a risk factor, so locking that up doesn't do anything but keep that child, reduce their access. And then discuss the what ifs beforehand. So is there a signal for adult intervention, a quick text? Don't be afraid to say something or have something prepared if you need to intervene. Like, I think the line they give in this article, which you all get this information, you'll have links and resources. But It could be something like, I don't think your child is feeling well. I need you to come get them. If you don't want to make accusations to other parents, things like that. And empowering your team to know the rules here and to be able to say them, hey, that's against what we agreed upon for this gathering. Another tool, this is pretty small. You'll get the large scale version, but this is a family prevention planning tool. And it works its way from what our beliefs and values are as a family to what are our rules and expectations based on those beliefs and values. What are the consequences to breaking those rules or expectations? And then these are people we trust or sources of information we trust. This can make it that much clearer to a child why something is happening, what the expectation is, and why the expectation is there in the first place. That why can be really important. So this is a very, like a clear outline of how you could do that. And craft communication skills. So this is something that we just learned in like a group training in Massachusetts that we all thought was very helpful. By the way, I didn't already mention it, but I will now. Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation is offering a free online family program, adolescent program, and children program. And these are for people who are dealing with a loved one's addiction. And they are run by licensed family therapists, and they teach skills such as this. So we will have more information. I'll leave a flyer here about that if you are ever interested or know someone who might need it. The first part of craft communication, this is just a style of communication that's evidence-based that has shown increased chances of someone ceasing alcohol and other drug use or entering treatment for alcohol and other drug use. But the first part of it is be positive, right? We really want to trust you and give you privacy. Can we have an honest conversation about this thing? If someone came home drunk last night, or if you just notice a change in their mood, right? It can apply to either situation. Be brief, have clear points. That might require several conversations with your supports beforehand to make it this way, of course. Being specific on the thing you'd like to see, right? I don't want you doing that anymore. A child's brain might say, I don't know what else to do. I don't know what to put in place of this. So I'd like to see you spending more time with your friends doing healthier things, right? What if you have your friends over at our house and you're at the pool? Can that be an alternative? So being very clear about what you'd like to see. If you don't take anything else from this, what I was told is this can be the most vital component is offering an understanding statement. And, if we say, I understand, it must feel like this. I know I've heard from students, you don't understand. You have no idea what I'm going through, right? So something we can do is mirror something we've heard them say. Like, I've heard you say friends are really important to you. I've heard you say you can feel a lot of stress sometimes. So echoing that as your understanding statement, along with labeling your own feelings in the process, accepting a small piece of responsibility. Maybe it was, you're right, I was scared, so I reacted in an angry way, and I'm going to work on that. Maybe it's, you're right. Me telling you I was going to pick you up if you needed help might have led you to believe in some way. I think it's okay for you to get drunk, but I want to be clear now, right? Whatever way that can happen. And then the last part is offering help, which can be very specified, very specific, a plan of help that you've already decided. It can also be more open. It could be something where you invite the child to put input in on what would be most helpful. This can also work with adults, little brothers, partners. I've tried it with. It's just anecdotal research, but I think it works. But anyway, these are some further resources right here. Oh, one more thing about craft. Don't be discouraged, right? If your child doesn't respond immediately to that style of communication, it might take trying it multiple times for them to be receptive or open to something like that. But these are a number of our partners and resources, great sources of information. commonsensemedia.org. They have so much information about healthy technology use and healthy media choices. I think they review different programs. They have a try out social media game for children who are younger to see how they might handle online health that can, or online situations that can be risky for their health. What else should I shout out? Monitoring the Future is nationwide data they've been gathering since the 70s in anonymous surveys in public and private schools. Also really interesting data points, information there. But with that, I'm going to stop talking for a minute and please allow you to digest any of that or spout out thoughts, questions, comments, concerns. Yeah, please.
So I'm like still formulating my question, but what you said about, I always wonder like if we're sending mixed messages to kids. So like you said, like if, I don't think my kids are there yet, but like, you know, drinking responsibly at home, but like if you're at a party, say, and there is alcohol, like I want you to call me because I would never want you to get in the car. Like we're sending mixed messages, and that's like with digital, it's with, you know, alcohol, it's with, you know. So do you find like working with kids that they talk about kind of the question mark of like, yeah, but my parents say this, and then there's also this messaging, like how do they tease it all out, and how do we help them then like find the right sort of path, I guess?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah, so no, it's okay. So for folks online, the question is, in my time working with students, do I hear how they receive mixed messages? Maybe like, I'll pick you up if you're in an unsafe situation, but I don't want you to drink or use other drugs, right? And how they might deal with that. Is that kind of, okay. I think students I think they are processing it. And sometimes when I ask them, do you have clear family rules in your house about alcohol and other drug use? They're like, I mean, I like pretty much know, like it's this a little bit of uncertainty, which can be enough to indicate like, or to help them make an unhealthy choice, right? But in constant, frequent reminders and communication saying, your health is top priority to me. For that reason, if you find yourself intoxicated, unsafe in any way, please call me. I want to help you in that situation. I want you to know I expect you not to use alcohol and other drugs, and to think about healthy friends, whatever kind of things you want to talk about. But I think what is helpful in that way is emphasizing like the health perspective. When I'm in a classroom, I'm not saying right or wrong or good or bad. We're saying healthy, unhealthy, less healthy, more risky, less risky. That's the kind of language we use. And I think that can really translate with kids as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Violating your child's privacy versus kind of trust relationship with them based on what they say it's going to do. Because I know there's, you know, some schools will get electrolyzer before and after the event, have to prove that no, nobody was doing drinking or anything like that. But how does that translate to a like situation at home where, let's say, your child's driving and the expectation is, you know, we're never going to drink and drive, but you know, do we test it when you get home, or at what point do you, you know, like what do you do in a situation where it's like a trust versus, you know, maybe you're suspecting something's going on, and so you look in the room and you find something you're not supposed to, and then how do you deal with the, I guess the trust versus over the head of the bed, I found this, or you to come home, that type of situation.
I appreciate that question. Just to kind of sum it up, where's the line between violating your child's privacy and practicing like parental monitoring strategies where you might be looking in their room or breathalyzing them when they get home or choosing to drug test them, something like that? Honestly, in terms of like breathalyzing and drug testing, the research is really mixed on whether that deters adolescent drug use or not. But what I can say, and it's similar to how I tell children, because we're talking about how to help a friend, how to have early intervention conversations with a friend, how to just tell them, hey, I noticed this, and this is how it's making me feel. I'm worried about you. They're like, yeah, but you know, my friend might get mad at me. They might like not talk to me anymore. They might do this and that. I think it's like, yes, and you were operating in your own values, right? Of what you think a healthy friendship should look like. So kind of similarly, right? If you're practicing monitoring to keep your child healthy and safe, that's your intention. However, your child takes that and you can talk through it. Hey, I understand it might feel right now like I don't trust you. I'm your mother and it's my job to take care of you. Sometimes that means making sure you're where you said you are, right? Making sure that you have access to things that are going to keep you from living the life you want to live. I want to see you do things that you love. I want to see you be able to continue to do those things. For that reason, I need to monitor. I need to see your phone, right? I would definitely welcome any input from other parents who have been through that or have thought about it, ways that you handle it. Oh, sorry, I thought that was a hand. Just an itch. It is difficult, yeah.
You know, because if you put down certain consequences, then you can lock them out or they can lock you out. So it's constantly shifting sands and managing it. Sometimes I think it's helpful to have a two-prong approach as far as good cop, bad cop. And again, it's constant balance.
Thank you for saying that. And absolutely, I'm sure it's not easy. I was not easy to parent.
I have a question.
Yeah.
My child asked a lot of direct questions about my past,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm very open and upfront, and it goes from smoking a cigarette all the way to whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents were drinking a martini in front of me and lying to my face, so I just do the opposite as far as just being really transparent. But
Yeah.
any data or whatever on something like that?
Yeah, thank you. So like the question was like, how vulnerable should I get when my child asks me direct questions about my own substance use? Like, is there best practices in terms of that? There's not like a specific study or research that I can point out that I'd like to, but what I can say is, generally speaking, if it's something that you've processed and dealt with and feel comfortable sharing, that can be a learning opportunity for your child when you're sharing what it was like for you. And maybe it was like, this really worked out for me. I'm totally fine. I had a lot of fun. That's okay too. Don't tell them that. They see you, they know you're okay. But I know that we can, and this is perhaps a false note of belief, but I think we can all think of someone who didn't turn out okay, who was maybe in the same group or who used in a similar way. So couching what you're saying with consequences, right? And emphasizing that like, it was all right for me. It might not be all right for you. Let's talk about risk factors. Let's talk about your protective factors and the fact that you might not know until it's happening. It's kind of like rolling a dice, not to make a gambling reference. We're talking about addiction, but yeah. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Kind of. Okay. Go ahead and then.
I do think I like that question because I'm just in parenting in general.
Mm-hmm.
I
Hmm.
more approachable we are, which to your point, doesn't mean you say all the terrible things that happen and then all the negative consequences in an extreme way, but it just seems to me like the more human we can be about, and that this is, something that we went through, learned to, you're in this process now, I'm here to protect you, like you said, and watch out for you, that would make a parent more approachable.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Absolutely. Oh, sorry.
So I'm a little lost on the prevalence of different forms of substance abuse at this point. Our kids are young, just now for the first time having middle schooler.
Mhm.
Your graphs showed that it looks like there's been a decrease in abuse of alcohol over the course of time since 2012 to today. So are we seeing the use of alcohol decrease and seeing other substances increase? Like, is it that alcohol is less of the risk factor right now and drugs are a greater risk factor? It's the lay of the land, essentially.
Thank you for asking that. I appreciate it. So alcohol is still and has been historically the most commonly used substance amongst adolescents and teenagers. In terms of marijuana use and nicotine use, it's lower than any percentage of alcohol use that was presented on the graph. Marijuana use has remained fairly steady over time, nationally speaking. I don't know specifically for this Kentucky data, but nationally speaking, it's remained fairly steady. Something we saw in any type of drug use for the year of 2021 was these statistically significant decreases, right, in all types of drug use, likely related to pandemic, right? Changes in social environment, parental monitoring, access, all kinds of things were happening at that time. Nicotine use, vaping specifically, which is the most common way nicotine use happens today. Cigarette use has been plummeting. It's in the single digit numbers now. It spiked. It met its spike in 2019, and since that point has been on a slow decline. Not to say it's not still happening, not being used, but when I talk to kids about nicotine vaping or any type of vaping, they are ready with the health effects. They talk to me about prevention ads that they're seeing, those things that are starting to work. And sometimes they'll tell me it's less like trendy now in a way. And I do have requests today for, not in this community actually, but I have more requests today for nicotine cessation information for kids who maybe have started using, would like to stop. So in terms of things like other drugs, younger ages, like middle school ages, are more inclined to abuse medications in some way or use inhalants. But again, these numbers are minuscule, like 1 to 3%. And things like fentanyl, the use is very, very low. And I don't know how many stories you see about fentanyl or opioids, but it's very prevalent in the media right now. It's very scary. And it does come up in conversations with kids. I ask them what they think the quote unquote worst drug is, and they're like, fentanyl for sure. So we talk about that. But what we know about opioid abuse, children are most often introduced to opioids through sports injuries or through dental surgeries. Those are the two avenues. So anytime a child is prescribed a medication like that, please have in your possession any prescription medication. Not a bad idea for you to be the keeper or to be the counter of those pills. What we know about any type of opioid misuse or fentanyl use, kids who are using those are already drinking, are already using marijuana and nicotine. Alcohol being the most common denominator. So that's kind of the reason we talk the most about alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana. Any other questions specifically, like another substance, I'd be happy to think about or answer or point you to some information. Yeah. Synthetic nicotine, oh, like nicotine salt products. Okay. Okay. And just information about them.
If that's kind of a prevalent
So something we are seeing more of, I haven't had questions about it in your community specifically, but there are these nicotine salt pouches that look like smokeless tobacco pouches, dip, but they are not any tobacco matter. They're white. They're nicotine that is extracted from the tobacco plant and put into a whole bunch of additives, chemicals. So those are, students look at them the same way they initially looked at vaping, right? This could be a healthier alternative. There's no tobacco in there, right? So it's just the nicotine. So it's about talking about the effects of nicotine in and of itself, which impacts our bodies and our brains in a great, not a great way, like a vast way. And also like what those additives are, how regulation is slow to happen, and we don't always know what's in products, even when they're being sold legally on shelves. But yeah, something we are hearing more about, that nicotine salt was first developed by the e-cigarette or vaping industry. And when someone inhales a vape that has a high milligram dosage of nicotine in it, it's less severe, less harsh on the throat that way. That's why they started incorporating it. And now other products are including it as well. So thank you for that question. Online. Yes, yes.
So my oldest is at the younger range of the grade. So this is all new information and whatnot. So my question is really kind of geared toward the parents.
Sure.
Some help. In regards to those parents that have the older students, whatnot. At what age did maybe like the larger gatherings start happening to where maybe my kid's not involved in them yet, but we're kind of just seeing like some smaller, like, sleepovers, things like that. So I guess I'm just curious as to what is the culture within collegiate, I guess? And at what age does alcohol seem to become more prevalent, if you will? Or I don't know if there's any parents that are willing to share to people who are on the younger scale of this as to like what their experience has been, or what kind of like when the larger gatherings are happening, things like that. Just kind of uncharted territory.
Yeah, I understand. Does anyone want to respond? Their thoughts, experiences?
Sorry, I'm gonna put you on the spot, but
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Say as a parent of a sophomore, if you think of COVID, and so as a sophomore, my student wasn't really into gatherings, so I feel like I'm new because gatherings are now coming back, and so we all kind of had a hiatus because people weren't really having parties like that. But people still were getting together, and even in some small groupings. And I have to say, a thank you to you, because I came to your presentation last year and you made me absolutely change my perspective of parenting, because I thought, well, my kids are getting older. I can take a seat back. I can relax a little bit. And you basically said, no, you got to put your foot on the gas. And you got to ask questions. And you even challenged us that when our kids go to other people's homes, that we've got to state our expectations. If we don't state them, then you are basically allowing for anything to happen. And I thought there's no way I could do that. But I really want you to know that I changed who I am because of this presentation. I was like, yes, I absolutely do that. When I take my kids to anybody's house, I will state to the parents, what my expectations are. And at first my kids were like, are you kidding me? Yeah, but now they're used to it. And now that, she shared this matrix about having events, hosting your events, that she's put me in the hot seat again. I'm like, oh, I can't do it. That is so embarrassing. I can't do it. But I know that it could absolutely save lives. And so that's why I do. But yes, I'm anybody who's ever had my kids at their home, I try to make it light. I'm like, hey, just want you to know I'm the rules with my kid. No smoking, no drugs, no drinking, no guns. Do you have guns? If you don't say it, then whatever the rules are at that house apply to your child. And when I take other people's kids, I will remind them, hey, y'all, these are the rules. No drugs, no smoking, no kissing, no making out, no drugs. Okay, you got that at the fair? Yes, you got that at the fair, Miss Lawrence. Okay. So that's just kind of me, and I want to thank you for that very much.
Thank you for sharing your experience. That was really nice, and I'll probably cry about that later. So thank you.
That really has changed me, so I'm very grateful.
Thanks.
We are running a little bit over
Yeah.
time, which is fine. Maybe do one more question and then we'll wrap. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how careful we are. I think sometimes the kids will have their first time.
Yeah.
When that happens, what are some strategies you can do? And then you don't get through those strategies. I still have that other time. 7 times tries.
Thank you very much for that. So I think a starting place, no matter how old your child is starting to identify, where would I go if I needed help with this? What resources do I have around me? Who are my sources of personal support and clinical support that I could get my child, right? So identifying those, because when it happens, I'm sure that your heart drops and our brains aren't thinking the same way. So having that plan in place. In a situation where a child, if they are still intoxicated with any type of substance, the goal is first to stabilize, right? Make sure that they are medically safe and well and okay. And then from that point, starting with those craft communication skills the next morning, when the effects of that substance have worn off, right? We need to have an honest conversation about what happened last night. And moving through those pieces. There are a number of resources available here in your community that Julian Dietz, I know, has a list of. So, I think too, in some 12-step groups like Peer Support Recovery, AA, NA, Al-Anon meetings, there is a discussion of like what natural consequences can look like. And while that's like very painful for, I think, any loved one of someone they care about to watch happen, right? Any kind of natural consequence. No matter what my folks did, like I had to go through and have my own process and run into so many roadblocks before I considered changing my behavior, kind of like you said. So I think continuing to offer support, communication, connecting them with resources, help, weekly support meetings, individual counseling sessions, taking them to a doctor for an assessment, that's the starting place, or a counselor, so that you can all work together to create a plan, like your team, the doctor, and you. That would be my thoughts on that.
Last thing, I know we had requests for maybe some books online. Some people would ask if there were some reads or books that you would recommend.
Oh, yeah.
And I think in addition to maybe sending out the PowerPoint to our parent community along with the link for this recording so people can watch, if there is a short list of books, maybe even sometimes those lists of books can be really overwhelming.
So like
even if you could like
3 pinpointed. Yeah.
Must reads.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be really helpful.
Yes, I can absolutely share that. Books, documentaries, etc. So, yeah.
Just chime in with an answer a little bit more specifically to you, Erin.
Thank you.
What we are, and maybe you could restate this on the microphone for those at home.
Absolutely.
We have heard from our students through individual and group conversations with the counselors in the middle and the upper school, is that our students are exposed 7th, 8th, and 9th grades, right? That's when they're saying that they're exposed. Some are doing it, some are not. 7th and 8th, more of the focus is on vaping. Alcohol is more 8th, 9th. Okay, but our 9th graders are saying we have been exposed by the time they come to us in the upper school. Thank you. So that gives you a sense of when it's, which is why I wanted to include middle and upper school.
Yes, thank you very much. Can I ask you to repeat that into the microphone? I apologize.
Sorry, online people.
Yes, hello, online people. I'm just, I'm literally reading a text from Julian Dietz here that our students in grade 7 and 8 are exposed to vaping, and that our students in grades 8 and 9th are saying that that's when they're exposed to alcohol. So most of our students, when they are coming to us in the upper school, said that they have been exposed to both vaping and alcohol, but it seems to be that vaping is the first substance that is more prevalent in our community, and then alcohol follows soon thereafter.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Okay, with that, we will go ahead and be semi-respectful of your time and let you leave as you will. I'll be here answering any questions or having conversations that you want to have. But I really, really thank you again for taking time out this evening to come here. And I hope you all stay well. Yeah, of course, of course.
Appreciate it.